Welcome to the Radical Center podcast. I'm your host, Joe Kopsick. We have our other co-host, A.M. Casto, on the line. Say hi, A.M.
Hey, how's it going?
We got some technical limitations on this first episode, but we should be able to get video of both of us by the second episode, so bear with us. The Radical Center podcast is a weekly, hour-long podcast available on YouTube. It deals with the two-party duopoly, which, for those who don't know, is a near monopoly where two very similar parties have all the power. And it's also about the left versus right dichotomy in broader political philosophy, ranging outside of American politics to include theories as far out as communism, right-wing nationalism, anarchism, etc. To start off, I want to be clear about what we mean when we say the words radical or anarchist, because a lot of people hear those words and they think of chaos and Molotov cocktails. But really, anarchism means no rulers, not necessarily no rules, just no rulers. And the root word of radical is radix, which means root. To be radical is to strike at the root of the problem. Before we go on to today's topic, modern U.S. presidents, and how it relates to the illusionary left versus right false dichotomy, I'm going to define radical center. This is from Wikipedia. Most radical centrists borrow what they see as good ideas from left, right, and wherever else they may be found, often melding them together. Most support market-based solutions to social problems with strong governmental oversight in the public interest. There is support for increased global engagement and the growth of an empowered middle class in developing countries. Many radical centrists work within the major political parties, but also support independent or third-party initiatives and candidacies. I'd say this is a pretty fair description, but as the show goes on, we'll go more into depth about this. But first, I'm going to introduce myself. Again, my name is Joe Kopsick. I'm 30. I live in Lake Bluff, Illinois. I studied political science at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I made 3 unsuccessful runs for the U.S. House of Representatives as a write-in independent candidate. I run a blog called The Aquarian Agrarian at www.aquarianagrarian.blogspot.com, and I'm currently active within the Libertarian Party. And now I'll turn it over to A.M. to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm A.M. Short for Alec Matthew Casto. I was originally born in Dayton, Ohio, but I live in Pickle, Ohio, a much smaller town. My political party affiliation is the Libertarian Party. My education is currently just high school education, but I look to further my studies in the near future and possibly go to economics and stuff. And I currently do not have any websites up as of now, but I look to possibly put one up about libertarianism and philosophy behind it. And that's really all about me.
So A.M. and I, guys, we had pretty much a 5-hour conversation about U.S. presidents and everything in between, going back to Lincoln last night. So we've been talking about putting this podcast together for a while, so we just started to do it today. And so I guess we're going to start off by talking about, as a branch-off topic, the 2016 presidential election. You guys might know of a website called isidewith.com that you can put in the answers to 70 some odd questions, and it'll sort you according to how much percentage you agree with each major person and party who's running for president, and they're trying to collect information for Senate and House candidates too. So according to that website, I agreed with Trump about 55% of the time and Clinton about 60%. I still couldn't find it in my heart to vote for Clinton, because of that little 5%. Because I voted for, I supported Gary Johnson 90% of the time, and the Greens about 80%. There are things I liked about Trump. Mostly they're personal rather than political, and the things I like about Hillary are political rather than personal. So for me, they were just too similar, and so are I basically view both parties and every politician in them who's taken seriously. I typically find them to agree 80-90% of the time, and I can't support any of them anymore. That's why I'm involved with the Libertarian Party, and I'm going to see if the Green Party is open to some ideas. And AM and I were talking. We both kind of feel a little bit like we're between Libertarians and Greens. I don't know if I characterize your position right. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, exactly. I've always linked back and forth between the Green Party and the Libertarian Party. I feel like both of them have a lot of better ideas than the two mainstream parties and stuff. Problem with the whole two-party system is that a lot of their ideas are they're stale. They're not as freshly or as new as libertarianism or the Green Party. With those parties, you get more choice and stuff. You get more self individualistic ideas versus, big government of the Republican Party and Democratic parties.
Right, they tend to be closer to individual rights and community rights and local issues. They tend to be more dovish on foreign policy, um, and they just agree with each other a lot. If you've ever seen the Gary Johnson versus Jill Stein debate, that was really informative and entertaining. Um, this all goes back to what was identified in 2007 as called the Progressive Libertarian Alliance, when people like Ralph Nader, Dennis Kucinich, Mike Gravel, and Ron Paul, and to some extent Bernie Sanders, they were voting together on a lot of issues. And today that would be represented by like Rand Paul and Cory Booker having in common things like repealing mandatory minimum sentencing and liberalizing, marijuana, for example. Anytime that libertarians, Greens, conservatarians, any other third parties, anytime they agree on, stop all the foreign wars and save money in the process and respect the full Bill of Rights.
Not to interrupt you, but I do notice that the one thing that a lot of those people agree on is is not going to war, which is interesting because the Democrats and Republicans, they both like the one thing they totally agree on bipartisan is war. But the third parties like the Green and Libertarians, they're bipartisan on not going to war.
Yeah, and I really feel like if we could just kind of get the most progressive of the Democrats and the most libertarians among the Republicans, I think we could, avoid all these unnecessary wars that people like Bernie Sanders, he voted to go into 12 different countries. Who did you vote for in 2016 for president?
Actually, I voted for Gary Johnson.
I did too. Did you have any reservations about that? Were there anything you disagree with him about?
The one thing I didn't really like was the fact that he went on basically public live TV, and this is kind of a personal thing. He didn't even know what he was he had a thing for a minute to say about Aleppo and stuff, and I'm like, wow, well, that's kind of scary to have a president that doesn't even know where that's at.
Right. I totally feel that, and there's a lot of people, especially people who aren't libertarians, who feel that way, and it's like, with the recent events in Syria, part of me, it's really kind of a smart-ass thing to say, but I like to say, it'd be nice to have a president who doesn't know where a place is, so he doesn't have the ability to bomb it.
I remember when he was on Bill Maher and stuff, and he actually held his weight pretty good with Bill Maher. He was asking him a bunch of questions. Basically, Bill Maher was sitting there, and he was basically accusing them of Gary Johnson and his party members being insane and stuff. And he was I forget exactly what the question was, but it was about cutting some funding, and Bill Maher was you probably support cutting the military 50%,
Right.
and Gary Johnson's actually only 20%.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and the audience applauded, and Bill Maher's like, "So you are sane after all." And I think that's just a difficulty that all third-party candidates are going to have is a weak spot on foreign policy. They're going to focus on local issues and domestic policy, but even though Gary Johnson is the only one of the 4 presidential candidates that election cycle with governor experience, real executive experience, Hillary was in the White House but wasn't elected there. Even though you might have someone with governor's experience, they don't typically have, they can run a National Guard, state National Guard, but they haven't run an army.
People often mistake the two, but they're a lot different. They're ran differently, they're operated differently.
Yeah, and that's why I think we had this whole, even though Hillary and Trump didn't have executive experience, they had experience in the public eye, and they were camera tested in a way that Gary Johnson was not.
He was kind of basically sent to the bottom of the ocean as far as any chance of actually winning. You remember that one commercial that they posted with Abraham Lincoln, with Will and Johnson? It was with Abraham Lincoln. It had him saying, "Don't vote for Donald Trump or don't vote for Hillary. Vote Johnson."
I wish they, if they're going to use Lincoln in the commercial, I wish they had played on the idea that this isn't exactly true, but the 4 presidents on Mount Rushmore, they weren't Republicans or Democrats. Washington was a Federalist, Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive bull moose guy, and Lincoln was he was a Republican, but that was right before that him was the Democrats and Whigs, so he was the first president of the Republican Party.
Actually,
So
Washington was nonpartisan. He actually warned against political parties, like the start of them and stuff. Adams, as vice president, was a Federalist, but he actually he didn't align with any party.
that's true, and I think if the commercial had kind of focused on that it's independents, third-party people, and people who are against partisan politics, and people who are the first nominee of a new party, it's those people who are, mavericks. So if you had to choose, do you think, would you have voted for Trump or Clinton if Greens and Libertarians weren't an option?
Honestly, probably Trump, possibly, but at least like with him, he's up front. You know what you're getting. Like he's a pretty much an asshole. But like I feel like with her, it's like a snake in the grass. Like it's kind of a fake. Whole acting like she gives a crap and stuff like that. She flip flops on her positions. I mean, he does too, but she's kind of like acts like she's like a princess or something. Like since she was first lady and stuff like that, she had that hierarchy kind of like attitude about her. Like, oh, I'm doing stuff for the common man, and all that. But really, she wasn't doing crap.
Right, and as you pointed out last night, Hillary has been against gay marriage. She has been in favor of deportation, and her husband's crime bill, which Bernie Sanders protested against vociferously and then voted for, put 2-3 million minorities and nonviolent offenders in prison. And so it's like with Hillary, you have to dig up all this old stuff to see what her old positions are. With Trump, he'll talk for a minute and have 8 positions, and it's all on record. You don't have to dig anything up. And for the military thing, he's doing that on purpose. I forget the exact term for it, but he's trying to stay one step ahead of his enemies so that he's unpredictable. Intentional ambiguity, when you're purposely not clear. And Israel practices intentional ambiguity about its nuclear weapons. It's known that they have a ton of them, but they don't want to formally admit them because they don't want anyone to make them sign treaties that they don't have the right to sell them to other countries.
I remember reading that one article he wrote. It was like about how the less you know about what his positions are, the more faster he's moving on like policy. Like he flops back and forth, but his action just happens like that. Like.
Yeah, I wrote an article called "Consequences of Trump's Victory are all about probability," and I used some particle physics metaphors to illustrate it. It's like we don't know where Trump's going, but wherever he's going there fast, and you can tell that by.
I think that was the phrase that I was trying to. Like, I couldn't exactly remember.
Yeah, it's like he talks fast, he changes his position fast. With Hillary, it's just like yammer on, like, take 20 years to change your position. You got to dig up old videos and voting records. With Trump, it's like what George Carlin said about Bill Clinton. It's that, like, Bob Dole said, "I'm a plain and honest man," and everyone knew that was bullshit. But Bill Clinton came right out and said, "Hi, folks, I'm completely full of shit, and how do you like that?" And the public said, "Well, at least he's honest. At least he's honest about being completely full of shit." It's weird that you would say Trump is like the evil we know, even though Hillary's more or less been in the White House. I think Trump's more like the evil we don't know, but at least he puts the things we know and things we don't know out in the open. That makes sense.
I guess he plays it off in a way where it could go back either way. Really, the evil we do know or we don't know. It can be either or. You don't know. That's the thing. You can't really pick Trump very well because anything can happen really.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the fun of it. Like, I was just trying to imagine.
I mean, in a sense, he's hiding his policies.
Yeah, it's like with Hillary, I knew I was just gonna be like depressed like the whole time. Be like, yeah, I agree with her a little more but I just hate her personally, and her past is a huge problem, and she clearly has no morals.
The fact that Trump played a bad politician is exactly what he won. Like he basically intentionally was saying awful shit and out fucking stuff like that. Yeah, and that's how he won because he basically made fun of it, and he somehow just won.
Yeah, it's like he played the role of the Joker, and he put the insanity out there where you have to deal with it instead of making these long, boring decisions. So with Hillary, I knew I was just going to be bored and depressed, and it's the same old crap I've been hearing about since her husband became president when I was 6 years old. And with Trump, I knew I was just going to be, I was right. I'm spending this 4 years laughing my ass off and scared to death. I'd rather be happy and laughing and scared than bored and agreeing with my president about half the time.
Yeah, I feel it. Back more in depth of the election itself. I actually remember when Donald Trump, like when he first said that John McCain was not a war hero because he got captured. That I knew then for some reason this man's going to go very far.
Yeah, it's just amazing to watch stuff roll off his back, and he's Teflon Don.
Yeah, I remember back in 2012, people even wanted to run then possibly, but he ultimately backed down. Everyone thought he was just doing it to get better ratings on The Apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
And he finally actually did run in 2016.
Yep.
A lot of people don't notice he actually ran on as a candidate for the Reform Party back in 2000.
Yep. And when Comedy Central roasted him in maybe 2012 or something, everyone knew that he was thinking about running for president, and I think I forgot about that for sure. We were talking a whole lot about the differences between Richard Nixon and Hillary Clinton last night. The theme that I was repeating was that Hillary Clinton has taken everything that Nixon has done, and she's just done it 10 times more, worse and more evil. And she makes him look like an angel by comparison. A lot of examples there. He drew down troops in Vietnam, and you pointed out that he ended the draft, and then Carter started registration up again. And then Hillary was involved in the Watergate investigation, and based on the stuff with the primary rigging and just all her other.
Yeah, there was the thing is that back then they tolerated so much less. Like today, everyone puts up with stuff. A scandal is nothing. Back then, one little scandal could ruin your whole career. Now it's just not even doesn't even faze people.
Yeah, it's like Nixon's the pace car. It's like he got all the controversies, and then anyone who gets less controversies than Nixon looks great by comparison.
He pretty much was like a guinea pig, really, for shit like that. He basically was the test dummy for scandals and stuff, and then scandals kept happening and happening. I mean, there's obviously scandals before Nixon, but not as maybe other than Teapot Dome in the 20s and stuff.
Yeah, this is the thing I like about A.M. He knows a lot about early 20th century and late 19th century politics, like Chester Arthur. I don't even know what the Teapot Dome scandal was.
What happened was that in 1920, Warren G. Harding got elected against James Cox. Well, he had a group called the Ohio Gang, and basically they were very corrupt people that the member of his cabinet and everything, and they basically ran his administration to the ground. But one real big attribute, which is what I just said, the Teapot Dome scandal, was actually caused by his Secretary of Interior, Albert Fall. He got illegal kickbacks for an oil field, and it basically tarnished Harding's reputation because, as one president would say, the buck stops here. And it's really interesting, how he was admired as somewhat when he was alive, in the first 2 years of his presidency. But after he died and a lot of those scandals came out, it really ruined his presidency or his reputation as president. They also said he had a illegitimate child as well too. Her name's Nan Britt. Not too long ago, probably about in the past couple of years, they actually figured out that it was actually his daughter because they didn't know whether it was or wasn't.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how there have been, such personal scandals in presidential politics since the first days of, maybe the second or third presidential election. There are accusations of, politicians having affairs and guys shooting each other for calling their wife ugly. And then, of course, the illegitimate daughter thing. The Bush campaign pulled that against John McCain because they have an adopted Bangladeshi daughter that they called up people in the South and they said, how would you feel about John McCain if you knew he had an illegitimate black daughter, which wasn't true.
Oh, yeah, speaking of scandals and the fact that we were talking about Nixon, that's not actually his first scandal. He had one called the Checker scandal because it had to do with something with him, receiving funds and stuff. Political funds illegally or along the lines of that. He did a rally basically stating his innocence by saying what he actually used it for, and that was his dog Checkers.
Did he use his political contributions to buy the dog, or was the dog one of the contributions?
I think the dog was one of his contributions, possibly.
Okay. Yeah, that was when he was vice president to Eisenhower.
When Eisenhower was running for a second term, a lot of people wanted to kick Nixon off the ticket. An interesting story too, going back to Nixon. my grandfather once told me one time he was like walking the hallways drunk at night, and he kind of sobbed and said and had a picture of John F. Kennedy, and was like, why can't they respect me like they respect you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were also talking about last night about whether Nixon had a role in the assassination of Kennedy, and of course I consider LBJ a suspect in that. So, and we were also talking about Barry Goldwater and that he was a good friend to Kennedy, and would have been amazing to see a Kennedy Goldwater debate, but his death put a stop to that. Here's another topic. We were talking about how Calvin Coolidge and Grover Cleveland. Coolidge was a Republican, Cleveland was a Democrat. We were talking about how they were some of the most libertarian presidents of all time. They both did union busting, but despite that, they were classical liberals. The 1890s Democratic Party was really classically liberal. A.M. told me they're called the Bourbon Democrats, and that Wilson was originally a really progressive Democrat, and they were kind of influenced by Henry George, who died in the late 1880s and ran for New York mayor. Came up with land value taxation, which inspires me to this day. And then Calvin Coolidge, the early 20th century president, Silent Cal. And Grover Cleveland also is Ron Paul's favorite president. But do you have any comments on Cleveland or Coolidge?
Well, what's interesting about Cleveland is that, you know anything about like bimetallism and stuff like that, like the currency they wanted to use back around that time period?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking about William Jennings Bryan, his famous cross of gold speech. He said he won't crucify humanity on a cross of gold because he wanted silver in addition to gold, bimetallism.
Yeah, Cleveland favored like a dual kind of.
Right, and I think it's fair to say that Kennedy did too. He wanted value of money that's not going to be in constant decline, and they made the. I think he tried to make money redeemable in silver certificates or something, and they of course introduced the Kennedy half dollar, which was made out of silver after his death.
Yeah, he's also one of the few presidents that wanted to go after the Federal Reserve. But going back to Cleveland and Coolidge, what's so fascinating about Coolidge is that even as a conservative president, he had like I'm not even sure how many vetoes, but even as a conservative president, he still has the power just by saying no, like vetoing. Like he was deemed the great refrainer versus the opposite term, like the great reformer. Like he basically used power by doing the opposite instead of progressive reform. He wanted to preserve the status quo, and which a lot of people think, oh, he's downsizing government, but no, actually, even vetoing is still a powerful, it's big government.
Right, it's so hard to stop the increase in the size and scope of government that, sometimes you just got to veto everything you can just to keep government the same size. I'm sure Gary Johnson could identify with that pretty well with 700 vetoes over 8 years.
In a way, it's big government either way, but it's big government that gives power back to the people.
And we were talking about a topic that comes up between us a lot is progressive Republicans, people like Teddy Roosevelt, Jack Kemp, John Kasich, Robert La Follette. Because a lot of people remember that we had the Southern conservative Democrat Dixiecrats, but not a lot of people remember that the Republican Party was founded in Wisconsin and it was influenced by Marxists. So it was a bunch of Northern liberal Republicans who valued individual rights and mercantilism versus classically liberal Bourbon Democrats and Dixiecrats. And we also mentioned Samuel J. Tilden. So there's this history of Northern liberal kind of progressive conservatism.
The Eastern establishment, with Thomas Dewey and Nelson Rockefeller, they were pretty much the liberal moderates of their parties, and basically Goldwater was one to throw them out when he was running in '64. Thomas Dewey, he ran for twice for president, once against FDR and the second time against Harry Truman. He basically favored similar reforms like as Truman, but was a little more conservative, like a tad bit. That election was actually one of the biggest upset elections of all time. Like everyone thought Dewey would win that election in '48, but like the fact that Truman did a cross country tour on a train doing like over 300 some speeches, and basically Dewey doing like 18 or 19, Dewey was trying to run the strategy of like not campaigning too much, and it backfired.
Yeah, I guess Hillary made that same mistake. She couldn't fill crowds.
Yeah. Typically, people that run the negative campaign, typically they're the ones who end up losing.
Yeah, do you feel like Clinton or Trump ran a more negative campaign?
I feel like Hillary actually ran more of a negative campaign with all her. She was kind of more or less giving her commercials are like a guilt trip, really. Like she was trying to like with Trump world, my son can't live in Trump world and stuff like that, or basically it didn't outright say it, but you could obviously tell by the message it was regarding misogyny. Like it was a misogynist, like about young girls and stuff. I feel like Trump was on the defense. And another thing too is Trump didn't even really have to do like a campaign commercial because he basically already got free publicity from like CNN and stuff. What I don't get is that if CNN didn't want him to win, why do they cover him so much? They covered him so much, and they barely covered Bernie Sanders.
Hmm. I think it was really silly to see people say, yeah, why is CNN covering Trump so much? And I'm just thinking, because he's out there every day somewhere new talking to people, and Hillary's nowhere to be found with tiny crowds. It's like he gets free publicity because, I mean, I hate to say it, but he earned it. He's out there every day, like Truman.
Yeah, that's true too. I remember one rally. There was like I think it might have been like just Tim Kaine or something. There was like hardly anybody there. I was just like, wow, this is not gonna turn out good.
Yeah, like I forgot Tim Kaine existed 3 months after the election. I saw him at the State of the
Yeah,
Union
I did
speech.
too.
Like, oh yeah, he's a guy.
He looks like something out of like a Marvel comic.
I drew a political cartoon of him. I saw that vice presidential debate, and like, yeah, it looks like he looks like the Joker, and then Mike Pence looks like he's like a truck or George Liquor from
Or the
Ren
dude
and
from
Stimpy.
Johnny Quest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was all those Barron Trump, Mike Pence cartoons. To keep the theme going, we're talking about liberal and progressive Republicans and conservative Democrats and Democratic hawks and Republican doves, stuff like that. The other night we were talking about how FDR and Truman represented 20 years of Democratic presidency, which just increased and increased the size and scope of government power, internment camps, war, nuclear weapons, and then so by then the next president was Eisenhower, and by the end of his presidency we had 90% top marginal income tax rate, and then Kennedy got in and he said lower tax rates yield greater revenues. It's like it went back to 1890s for the Democrats in 1960. You have a classically liberal Democratic president, and for some reason you have Republicans who are about big government.
That's what I was saying about how like political parties they just seem kind of pointless. Like you can say you can identify as a Democrat but be liberal and or you can identify as a Republican with a platform of conservatism today, but you can consider yourself a liberal. Or vice versa with the Democrats, you can consider yourself, even though their main platform is liberalism, you consider yourself a conservative.
Right, and you were talking about the Blue Dog Coalition, the conservative
Yeah,
Democrats.
there's the Blue Dog Coalition. Trying to think here. The one, what was the Libertarian one? The Freedom Caucus. I know.
Yeah, that like doesn't exist yet. People are trying to form the Democratic Freedom Caucus of
Yeah,
Libertarian Georgia's
it was kind
Democrats.
of an underground project. Like it wasn't at like I remember reading about how it was just like it wasn't an official affiliate of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, like there are people working with it, but they have no elected members, whereas the four Democratic ideological caucuses do have congressmen and senators who belong to them, and then the Republicans have six ideological caucuses. I won't go through them all. But I'll at least touch on the Democratic one because everyone knows about the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I think it's the largest caucus in the Democratic Party. Then you have the Blue Dogs and the Populists, which are very small and in decline. And then the one with the Clintons, the Emanuels, Obama, Lieberman, Kerry. That's the New Democratic Coalition.
Third way or yeah.
Yeah, they're the neoliberals who listen to the neocons. Dick Morris told Bill Clinton to triangulate his position to, instead of get conservative principles into democracy, which would result in like blue dog democracy, he was saying, listen to Wall Street.
But like I was saying last night with the new Democrats or the third way, they're basically their policies are just Reaganomics light. Like they favor a lot of deregulation mixed with some social reform. Like they're economically to the right, but socially to the left.
This relates to neoliberalism, which is, the foundation of the philosophy of the last, I don't know, four Democratic presidents, maybe not Carter. And that's the thing that libertarians have to be careful about, and especially ANCAPs. It's because they support capitalism that they just think that any commodity, like anything that's commoditized or monetized, should be legal, including like sometimes, killing people, like killing people for hire, and that's part of what agorists call the red market, and that's not legitimate because it's legal, but it violates morality. It violates the non-aggression principle, people's right to be safe unless they harm someone first. And so libertarians need to be careful about not being neoliberals, and not everything has to be marketized. In fact, you shouldn't trade or have competition or have markets for anything where if it's a good or service that exists in abundance, all you need to worry about is distribution. You shouldn't have to worry about selling. And it's fine to love markets, but you shouldn't fetishize them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the thing is that we shouldn't force people to redistribute the wealth. Like, that's one thing I noticed with the neoliberals, too, as well. They advocate for free market, but they want to also implement the full redistribution of wealth. They basically claim they want to have, like, a fair capitalism system.
Yeah, and I was pointing out Nancy Pelosi was asked whether the Democratic Party is socialist, and she says, no, it's capitalist. And people associate Democrat with left, Republican with right. Democrats are right of center, so are Republicans. Like, it's things like Georgism and mutualism. That's the center. Everything left of that is socialism. Everything right of that is capitalism. And we live in a neoliberal, neoconservative, capitalist, not really, I put it in quotes, it's more like mercantilism. Tripartism is a related word. Government intervenes in the economy to make unions and corporations equal, when if it didn't intervene at all in the first place, they would still be equal.
Government basically, it says that, like, you have a right, but wait a minute. The fact that they're telling you that you have it, like, it's almost like they took it away.
We have natural rights that are inalienable that government doesn't give us, that government can't take away from us. Government can put us in chains, but they can't take away our right to free speech. They can put us in chains, but they can't take away our right to try to break out and defend ourselves and get a gun and kill our captors. And so every freedom that we have, government has tricked us into believing that just because it's mentioned in the Constitution, they make us think that it comes from government and that we have to ask them for permission and licenses and pay them. They have the exclusive right to profit from making us buy these licenses and permits and everything. And they sell our freedoms back. They steal our freedoms from us and sell it back to them.
Yeah, they steal our civil liberties and stuff. Like, the thing is, they steal our negative rights. Like civil liberties and civil rights are the whole backbone of negative rights. Like, positive rights are kind of like a voodoo. Like, you think you're gaining rights, but you're actually in a sense losing it because they tell you that you know.
Yeah, this relates to the Ninth Amendment. I won't go into detail, but the whole thing I just explained about licenses, you can read the Ninth Amendment on that. And a perfect example of this is marijuana legalization. We're getting a little off topic from presidents, but I'm sure we'll wind back there. Marijuana, I support full normalization and decriminalization, where there's so many people who are just so ready to legalize marijuana that they don't care how much they legal it up, as I like to say, by legalizing it. They're okay with taxing and regulating it. But government end up being the lead drug dealer, and then we have to deal with increased prices. People aren't as free to grow it. And then, of course, they spend the taxes to benefit police, and they tell us it's benefiting schools by fudging the numbers.
Well, in my state, like, when they were going to legalize it, it was actually an oligopoly. Like, only certain people in the state could control it, and then it, like, went down and failed easily.
Right, it's just government picking winners and losers again. It's in a new market that's just become legalized. Every time some new thing that's invented or comes out or becomes legalized, they just got to get their claws all over it and make money off it and raise prices in the process.
Yeah, it's just government's basically just a business that, like, robs people.
It's a racketeering operation. They create problems so that they can be the ones to solve it because they're the only ones who anyone trusts to solve it because they're the only legitimate authority. They have all the firepower.
Yeah, that's how power works, is that they use, like, tactics like that to, like, lure people in and all that, thinking that they're basically the whole battle between liberty and security, like we were talking about last night. For some reason, everyone always falls on the side of, like, security because they feel like, like helpless without it. But in reality, with that security actually creates self-helplessness, not get rid of it.
Right, as Franklin said, those who would sacrifice liberty for essential security deserve neither, and I view them as one and the same. We need to be safe and secure and free from our government.
Yep, exactly. How is society going to benefit if we're going to always have people at the top controlling us? If society is going to, like, truly prosper, it starts with the individual. Like I've said last night, with microeconomics. It starts with the individual and then prosperity. It doesn't start like with a bunch of people and go to one. It starts with one person and it grows. It starts small and goes big. It doesn't start big and go small.
Right, and that's why they teach microeconomics before macroeconomics in school. Macroeconomics is what we're told in school about economics, which is that it's about supply and demand, the New York Stock Exchange. But what we're not really told is that the stuff we learn in home ec is more like real economics, real microeconomics, the real definition of economics, which the root is oikos, which means household. Economics means the art and science and study of household management and acquisition of wealth. It's got nothing necessarily to do with, all the macro stuff they talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's the whole reason why people avoid going into home ec is the whole social stigma and the stereotype that it just benefits women. Like I noticed that like typically people don't want to go into that because they think it's a girly class, but no, actually it's a very beneficial class for both male and female.
It's important for all of us to learn how to cook and learn how to balance a checkbook because we don't know. You never know whether you're going to be the breadwinner or whether the spouse is. So it's important for, everyone, each individual person, because you could end up single too. You got to know how to cook and how to manage your house, and you got to know some trade skills so you can put yourself out there. And I think trade skills and factory work are just, I think everyone just shits on it these days and because they're afraid of it. They think it's dangerous, but it's how it raises the lower middle class.
Ill-informed about it. Like they don't know a whole lot about it, so they kind of like avoid going into it and all that. And back to the whole, I noticed you like mentioned a lot of whole like skills and trades and like learning all these skills and stuff. That's a libertarian philosophy because that focuses on the individual, like how he manages his, his economics, his social, whatever. Really, it's self-government. Like you are basically your like own government because you deal with your own, like you get paid to do something and stuff. That's your economic. That's how much you have to spend and everything. Your social policies, how you interact with other people.
It's like Ron Paul said, we can't have a free society that works unless and until everyone's, at least responsible for their choices and actions and to some degree independent and self-sufficient. And you can't really be self-sufficient. The term for this is called autarky, A-U-T-A-R-K-Y. You have to have that self-sufficiency in order to not depend on government from cradle to grave.
I think it was interesting how I found that like picture of Ron Paul with, what was his name, Don Black?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was actually, like I wouldn't have like thought he would have took like a picture with him and stuff. Like it kind of shocked me. Just thinking, wow, like I support Ron Paul, but that's kind of going to the extreme.
Yeah, David Duke was also a supporter of Ron Paul, but then again, David Duke was also a supporter of Donald Trump, although he criticized him over the Syria thing.
I saw where he attacked like Nick Haley for being neocon on Twitter.
David Duke?
Yeah.
Well, it's good that he didn't attack her for not being white. He's got his priorities in order at least. As they say, politics makes for strange bedfellows. When you're a politician who wants to get elected and know you can help people, it's hard to turn down support. And we saw that with Trump and Duke. We saw that with Ron Paul and the article I saw with the list of 10 racists who supported him. You got to understand Barry Goldwater and that whole thing to really. I had to deal with the whole Ron Paul is a racist thing for so long. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah, I've heard that back since like '08 when he like ran. I've been like hearing it forever.
Yeah, and it's like you confront people about that. It's like, what do you mean by that? You mean he's afraid to touch black people or afraid to work with black people? And they always say, no, of course not. It's like, well, how is he racist? What, because he doesn't want to steal from black people and white people to give to poor people, whether they're black or white? Like,
yeah, he doesn't want to steal from Peter to give to Paul.
Mm-hmm. It's like if you supported minorities, you wouldn't want to steal from them and steal their property and their liberty and their money and then give it back to them and tell them that you helped them. Like, that's slavery.
Yeah, that kind of makes the Great Society an oxymoron. You think about it, because it actually didn't create a great society. It did the opposite.
It created a society of dependence.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like when we name things like the Great Society or the Great Depression, we're basically like, just without people actually realizing, we're basically being sarcastic, like, it sucks ass.
Yeah, and there's so much legislation with ironic names, Patriot Act. I wish I could come up with more.
Oh yeah, and it takes away like civil liberties. Like it's just like it's almost like they're trying to like do that on purpose just to mess with us. like they basically want to like, ho, I'm gonna make a joke by doing this, like saying by naming this the Patriot Act, but like suspend like civil liberties and habeas corpus.
And this fight between the two parties over who's going to have more power and who's going to grow government, it's not a real debate anymore, and it's all just devolved into petty, sarcastic legislation, where it's like, yeah, I get it that women are fed up, they should have the right to choose what to do with their own bodies, but that doesn't mean that they should have some kind of petty revenge on, me and my male peers by having us go through humiliating doctor's notes and other processes just to get Viagra. Requiring teenage girls to sign up for the draft is the same thing. It's like you're just sentencing them to the risk of equal misery, equal slavery, and being cannon fodder. That doesn't make anyone better off. That just punishes people who haven't been punished yet. That ties into another topic, which we were talking about how Democrats really don't have they don't believe in freedom of choice except when it comes to abortion.
Yeah, but that's the only thing that they're libertarian on is abortion. Like when I was watching the Trump and Hillary debates, it like flipped on me for a second when they were talking about abortion. Now it's like Hillary Clinton favors small government as far as like like that, and Donald Trump's the big government person. I'm thinking, wow, it's funny how the Republican Party they favor small or government unless it's for abortion, and the Democrats favor big government unless it's like for abortion.
I think the true opposite of like a Hillary Democrat, like on that issue, would be like someone who's in the right of the Libertarian Party. Like they totally believe in libertarianism, it's just they're pro-life. And that's like the exact opposite of a Democrat who believes that their way is best and they're, feelings fascists and they want to tell everyone what's good for them and be their, nanny state. And then but freedom means you have to pay for my abortion. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's just not right. Like, I don't mind you having an abortion, but don't force other people to pay for it.
Yeah.
And here's another interesting topic that we haven't brought up. People often think that women have to, like, and I'm not being sexist or misogynist at all, but when it comes to like the child and stuff, the men almost have no say whatsoever. Like, I'm thinking that's kind of bullshit. When it comes to like if a woman wants to abort a child but the man doesn't, shouldn't there be like some sort of like agreement basically saying he doesn't have to pay child support, but she does. Like he can keep the child, but she has to pay. Instead of having it one-sided to where like the men always pay for like child support.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. I wish people would start putting like, what if one of you goes into a coma? What happens when one wants an abortion, the other parent doesn't, and what do you do about child support? I mean, it's covered in divorces, but the abortion stuff, I'd like to see that, in marriage contracts so that the government doesn't have to rule on it or legislate on it. Ties into the whole self-responsibility thing. If, the justice system is the court of appeals of last resort. We're supposed to be able to solve our problems amongst ourselves using voluntary decision-making and contracts and local government. Then we appeal to bigger and bigger governments.
I think I've told you before this. I'm not exactly sure, but have you ever heard the term? I forget exactly who said it, but they said that neoconservatives are just liberals that are mugged by reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there were a lot of liberals, baby boomer liberals who supported Carter, and then they were faced with the reality that they had to deal with Reaganomics for 8 years, so they either sold out or submitted or both, and their lives just became all about money, and they like to look like they care about the poor and get credit for voting the same as minorities, but their heart just isn't in it. They don't care about peace. They just worship money. They have their reactions so they can protect themselves. We're going to close up on this episode for today. Next time we're going to talk about how the left versus right dichotomy relates to libertarianism and anarchism. Say goodbye, A.M.
Yep, have a good one. See you
Have a
next
good night,
show.
guys. See you at the next Radical Center podcast. Have a good night.